Hello, welcome to Miniature Realms. My name's Stuart and today's video is all about Vallejo Xpress colour. Now I ordered these as soon as they're available for the general market. I was really looking forward to seeing how they compared with obviously Citadel contrast paint, but also with Army Painter's speed paint. I watched a couple of sort of very early reviews and they look fantastic and I was really excited to try them out. Those of you who are regular viewers to the channel will know that I make heavy use of contrast and speed paint over a zenithal pre-highlight, and this has formed sort of the basis of an awful lot of my painting these days. At least as a base coat level, I always go on and highlight afterwards. So I picked up this range with great excitement and I really wanted to record a video like this almost as soon as I got them. Obviously a lot of the bigger channels out there had pre-release copies of these paints in order to do full reviews, so I was never going to be one of the early ones. And then one thing after another, I just ran out of time and other videos took priority, and I've been using them now, what was probably a couple of months on and off, which in some ways has given me a little bit more insight rather than just slapping them on some miniatures. However, that is a little bit of what we're going to do today. I want to go over each colour individually and give you a bit of an idea of what they look like over a plain white prime. I know I don't do that myself very often during my painting, but I think it's the fairest way to give you an idea of what the pure colour looks like. So there's currently 22 bottles in the range, one of which is a medium for thinning the paints. There has been a little bit of early criticism of the range of colours in this first batch. I'll cover that a little bit more in my conclusions at the end. I think the range isn't too bad, but I would definitely like to see more in the brown and yellow range. So I scrambled around for some miniatures to use in this test video and found that I didn't really have much that I didn't want to use in other projects, but I did find some test prints I did for some 15mm scale mini rat Empire in inverted commas. These are also available in strips to use for War Master, but I printed their individual sculpts in order to sort of have a little play around. I primed these miniatures plain white. I wanted to show the colours off as they were rather than being slightly changed by any zenithal pre-highlight. I know I normally paint with a zenithal pre-highlight, so there is an argument there that it would have been wise to show you exactly how I use them, but I wanted it to be sort of a fair comparison and view of the colours as they are. So none of the paints come with agitators, and I find that quite a few of them need it. And I also find the bottles are slightly leaky. So this is a paint I haven't opened at all yet. So I'm just sort of demonstrating. When you first open it, you get a nice clean nozzle. But as soon as you've broken that seal, when you replace the lid and shake it again, I'm finding quite a little bit of leakage from the top. And as you go on and continually use the paints, I found that this gets worse. You end up with quite messy ends. And you'll see that there. So the shaking the bottle again the second time, now unsealed, you already see a little bit of paint leakage, and I've not even squeezed this on the palette yet. And then if I return to one of the paints I've already been using in my painting over the last few months or so, I've used this extensively. As soon as I remove the top, you'll see how much it's gummed up. Now this isn't new, paints do this, but it's definitely something like that felt like with these new bottle designs that may have been overlooked. So we're going to start with Cardinal Purple. I'm going to work my way through all of these colours. It's called Cardinal Purple, but it's a red more than a purple. I guess the cardinal is relating to the cardinal red colours that maybe you've seen from Spain, Spanish Inquisition style stuff. I may be way off. But what I'm going to do with all of these paints is just slap a fairly liberal coat over the whole miniature so you can see how it applies. Now this behaves much like any of the Citadel contrast paints really at this stage when you use it for one coat. It seems to settle nicely in the gaps and move away from the surfaces, so you're getting that one coat application. Sometimes some of the newer range of contrast paints, they've definitely moved on to do slightly different effects and they didn't pull quite as much in that way, but my initial view of these paints seems to be more of them work in that kind of as you'd expect kind of way for contrast and Army Painter speed paint for that matter. So now we have the Velvet Red. Now this looks to be the kind of red that would be something you compare with Blood Angels Red in the contrast range, something that you might choose for your British redcoats if you were painting military stuff. So those of you who follow my Napoleonic tutorials. And it's pretty good. It's not quite as rich, but it seems to cover quite well and leave that nice bit of pooling. I'll be interested to try it over a Zenithal highlight on some epic miniatures and see what kind of job it does. It's definitely something that you could look to purchase and use instead of contrast paint if you were looking to move away from the Citadel range. I like it. I will use it. Whether I'll drop the Blood Angels Red straight away from my repertoire and in place of this, I'm not so sure, but it's definitely up there. Now we have Plasma Red, and this is a slightly brighter red. You can see them on the palette behind, so I'm squirting a little bit out. It is a wet palette, it's not too damp. Quite often it's said that you shouldn't use wet palettes with these kind of paints. I think you can, but you wouldn't want to leave it on there for a long time because you wouldn't get them oversaturated with water, because it will change the properties a little bit quicker than it would with a regular paint. So as you can see, this is a bit lighter, a little bit more orange in it. And now on to orange. So this is Martian Orange. I'm not a huge fan of the Games Workshop orange paint. It's got quite of a dull, desaturated tone to it, which is quite useful for some things, but it's not very bright. This is much lighter, and it feels like it's more on that kind of almost edging towards the rich yellows scale. So I feel it's added something to the total range of these kind of paints that I didn't have before, so I'm quite happy with it. How often I use it, I don't know, but it's definitely filling a little bit of a spectrum gap there. Now this is Nuclear Yellow, so it's a little bit more on the yellow scale as you'd expect from the name, but still a fairly vibrant colour. Probably closest to Iyanden Yellow in the contrast range, and very similar to the old glaze they had of the same name. Now we have Imperial Yellow. I'm guessing this is more your kind of Imperial Fist style yellow, and again more of a richer yellow colour, more, I was going to say yellowy, which is an absolutely horrendous way of describing something, but as you can see going on the miniature there, it's much more bright, much less in the orange and reddish tones to it. So you've got some real range here in the brighter yellows. Now we have Wasteland Brown, and this is where I think the range starts to get a little bit light. So Wasteland Brown is absolutely fine. It's a yellowish brown, but I feel that it jumps a little bit from the yellows through to the yellowy brown. I feel like there's at least one paint in the range that is missing to join those two bits together. So this is nice. It's a nice yellowish, lightish brown, but I feel like that there should be something slightly in the middle of that, something a bit like the contrast Nasdaq Yellow. And now on to Copper Brown. This is one I've shook for ages, and it still has pigment in the bottom. Definitely feel you need to add agitators to these. I've been adding them as I've used them lots. I've already added them to a couple of colours. And again, this matches its description perfectly. It is a very coppery colour brown. I like it. It's a colour that doesn't really have a close match in the Citadel range. And I think it gives something different, which is really nice. But it's not naturally my favourite colour. I don't look at it and think, oh god, that's brilliant, like I do with Garrick Sur, which is vastly becoming my favourite for the contrast range. But it's definitely a really nice addition to the overall quick painting ranges of paints out there. And now we're on to Dwarf Skin, or Dwarf Skin it says on there. It looks like it's missing an R. I don't know if that's intentional or not. But I like this colour. I've used this on my fantasy dwarf tutorials I've done recently for an army I'm painting. And it shows very well how these paints can be used to produce a higher level of painting, not just slapping it on. So a base of this, over a pre-highlighted miniature, and then adding a couple of other colours, so a reddish colour and a purple colour, which we'll come up to later, that shade and add tones to it really, really nicely. I will pop a little link in now to those tutorials. If you haven't seen them, it's worth going and have a little look, because it shows those colours being used well. And this is Gloomy Violet, which is the colour that while thinned, I used to shade that skin colour. And I think that tutorial will give you an idea of how colours on their own that don't look particularly inspiring, I mean, they look absolutely fine as a fairly thin looking contrast style paint, but when you actually see them over a well prepared miniature and actually used as a technique rather than just slapping it on, really shows the strengths of these kind of paints, and also how much you can do with them beyond that kind of basic painting. Now we have Omega Blue, and I probably got this a little bit out of order really. It's not with the other blues. Now this blue in the pot looks a little bit like a royal blue. Once it's applied to the miniature, I really like it. And for those of you who are looking to do your French Napoleonic troops without any highlighting, so you are looking for a one coat option or something, it actually gives quite a good account of itself for giving you a nice, fresh, rich, vibrant blue. I think if you start highlighting it, it would probably look too light, but if you're using it over white like this and you want, as I said, that one coat option for your French Napoleonic troops or something, I'm aiming these comments at regular viewers of this channel, this will be a good option for you. I tend to go a little darker so I can brush highlight afterwards as well, but this is a nice paint. Now on to Deep Purple, not the band, and this is a nice rich colour. I haven't been super impressed with the purples from any of these ranges yet. They're okay, but they're not sort of wow. And these are pretty good. They're still fairly pigment light, so not super rich, especially these lighter tones. But I can see them being really useful for many things, sort of blending into skin and things like that, for painting larger scale miniatures. And for those people who are wanting to paint things like Zinch for fantasy and that kind of stuff. And it's and again, you probably see they're fairly consistent in the way they behave on the miniature. So they mostly pull really nicely in the recesses and actually show that natural kind of highlight, which is what these kind of paints are designed to do. Now this is Templar White. I think it's very similar to the Apothecary White from Games Workshop's contrast range. Maybe this slightly edges it. I've used them sort of interchangeably. I haven't noticed the difference too much. So essentially what this is a bit of a grey glaze. And for those of you who haven't looked at these kind of paints before, it's quite hard to see on the screen here, but it shades white really nicely. If you're looking for an easy way to paint white, a sprayed white miniature or a very heavy zenithal highlight with white, and then you apply this afterwards, it shades your white really nicely. You can go back afterwards with a little bit of fresh white and tidy up, and you end up with this really nice effective looking way of doing white. White really shouldn't be something scary anymore. So Space Grey here is a bluish grey, quite a sort of milky, contrasty style paint. Again, quite good for, if you thinned it, you could shade white with it, but give it a blue toned white rather than the kind of grey toned white that the Apothecary White did. Again, if you were trying to look for it to be a grey, so you're painting Space Wolves or something like that, I think it's a little bit too light for that. You'd have to do a couple of coats, but it definitely sort of fits in that kind of range of colours. But I think it looks, if you want to do a nice light grey, or as I said, shade white, it's a really good solution for that. Now this is Black Lotus. This is their only black in the range so far. And at first try, I didn't like it too much. I thought it looked too bluish. I was worried it wasn't going to be dark enough. But when it dries, it's actually really nice and seems to dry a lot darker than it's looking like now. And we'll see that towards the end of the video when I show you them dry. I really quite like it. It would definitely fill in the range where Black Templar does. It pulls a little bit more in the recesses than Black Templar does, so stays away from those raised areas. So for large areas, you may well find that it looks a little bit too light. But for smaller areas, it works quite well, and you'll see again later at the end of the video. Now we have Mystic Blue. It looks pretty bright and vibrant in the paint pot there. Something I have noticed with these is they do look fairly like the colour you get through the pot. And it seems an obvious thing to say with clear pots, but that is not always the case. And what you see through the pot tends to be the recess shade colour you'll see. Obviously it looks lighter over the top areas. Now this is kind of a mix between Talisar blue in contrast and Asomem blue, somewhere in the middle of those two, called an electric blue. And it's really pleasing colour, very, very nice. So this is Storm Blue, very, very similar to Storm Fiend from the contrast range. It's probably similar to non-contrast paints from Citadel like Macragge Blue, so it's that slightly greyish blue that gives you a different option there. And again, it's very consistent in the way it works and flows. You do get that one coat effect quite nicely. It's not super vibrant, it doesn't stain those top areas too much. But you've definitely got a lot of room to do a second coat on there, or to thin it again to have a way of shading and glazing with other things. So here we have Caribbean Turquoise. So this is one of the few that looks different out of the bottle than it does in the bottle itself. When it's very close together in the bottle there, obviously very mixed up, it looks very blue still, but when you spread it over the miniatures, the green tones come out, and then the name then makes sense. So you can imagine those sort of almost greenish blue Caribbean seas and things, and it's a very, very nice colour. Again, very, very rich and vibrant. I don't know how I'm going to use it yet, but definitely handy for many of the fantasy sort of painters and things out there, science fiction, maybe uses power weapons and things like that. So now we have Snake Green, so almost continuing on that kind of spectrum of greeny blues as we move into the green stages. And again, it's a very, very nice colour, fairly vibrant on the miniature. Very, very similar in some ways to that Caribbean, but as I said, more on the realms of the green stage. And again, perfect for power weapons and plasma and things like that. But of course, it'll be perfect for brighter clothing as well. Next up we have Lizard Green, and I've used this as the basis for the green on my Dwarf Warriors for my army. Again, that was one of those tutorials. And I don't like painting green very often. I prefer painting what's on paper is the harder things like the reds and whites and yellows, and I just enjoy painting them. But this has got a lovely, lovely vibrant colour. And I found that painting it over the Zenithal highlight, it really performs quite well over the darker areas, the black areas. Here it looks quite light. I think these paints work very well over that sort of Zenithal. For where it looks a little bit weak on the higher area here, is just over the white. You get a slightly different effect there. But I was able to use this as a base coat and then shade a little bit further with it, but also highlight very easily afterwards. And here we have Troll Green, so getting lighter on that spectrum all the time, and you'll see that it continues with that consistency across the range where you get that single coat effect quite well. This one may be slightly more opaque than some of the others, but you are still getting a good natural amount of paint in the shadows and the recesses there, and some natural highlights for the higher areas where it doesn't rest. Now we have Plague Green, so this is a sort of more of a sickly colour as you'd expect with a name like that. So it's darker, but also sort of almost murkier, brownier effect when you see it go on the miniature. So it's almost like it's been dirtied down with black or something. A little bit thin in some ways, but as I said, my experience with the Lizard Green is when it was on the pre-highlighted miniature, rather than just a flat white like this, it behaved very well. So I've got no reason to believe that this wouldn't work the same well. Now we have Orc Skin. For me, it just didn't seem like Orc Skin, but you know, what colour is Orc Skin? Maybe it's because it looks a little bit like the old Goblin Green from Citadel. I like the colour. It's quite light. I imagine Orc Skin to be darker in some ways, but I suppose it doesn't really matter too much what it's called, as long as you get an idea of what it looks like on the miniature. But very, very useful colour. I can imagine this being used for effects and things, especially if you're painting your Nurgle, if you're into your warhammery stuff. And overall a fairly useful paint. And again, it's super consistent in the way that it goes on the miniature. So as we head back to the table and see the miniatures with it dried, I think there's a really, really, really nice range of paints that are all super consistent with how they work on the miniatures. There are some that are slightly thinner than others, some that are slightly more milky, so to speak, and don't have the effect than others, but compared to the contrast range, they are a lot more consistent as a whole. I wish there were a few more browns in the range. They definitely need some darker browns. I think personally they're missing maybe 3 or 4 browns from that range, but if you can add those in, then it would be fantastic. I think they're got a much better range of blues and greens than they have with their oranges and browns, so I hope that will change in the future, but I don't feel like they need to add loads, and I'm pretty sure there are plans to add more. I've heard that mentioned quite a few times. I think we need to be aware and be mindful that the colour choices they have made for this initial launch will be aimed at more of a companion to the game colour range rather than the model colour range, so aimed at more general painters, which includes fantasy painters, rather than model colour, which may be aimed also at, and maybe more so at, military modelists and historical gamers. And there's definitely a lot of colour matches in those ranges which are absolutely aimed at the historical market. And wouldn't it be brilliant if they decided to bring out some kind of formulation that matches some of the most popular historical colours out there for World War II and things like that? How that would work, I don't know. Can you put German grey in an express colour and not have it look too light once it's applied? Can you have a one pot solution? I don't know. Maybe you can. Maybe that's not what we need. But I like this range overall, and I'm very, very excited to sort of see it grow. And just like Army Painter Speed Paints and Citadel Contrast, I don't feel I need to choose between any of them. I will continue to add to their ranges, and eventually I'll find that the blues I prefer from this pot or from this colour, and I'll mix and match and use whatever's best for me at the time. Now, if you are looking for one solution, you don't want to have different pots and different things from different manufacturers, or maybe you avoided Citadel Contrast before because you don't like Games Workshop or don't like the pots, that kind of thing. These are definitely worth looking at. They are significantly cheaper, as Army Painter Speed Paints are as well, compared to Contrast. And that's a big thing for a lot of people, especially right now. I couldn't do without the browns and things from the Citadel range, and I'd probably miss Blood Angels Red, I think, still. But this range here could replace an awful lot of the other contrasts if I didn't have access to them. And like I said before, price comes into it for me as well. And if I can get a pot that's, closer to the £3 to £3.50 mark rather than the £4 to £5 mark, then that's big. I deliberately haven't said too much about the individual price pots in this because you're watching this from all over the world, and you'll have your own pricing structures and things. You can check those and make your own comparisons. But what I'll say is just go out and buy some and try them and see what you think, especially if you're already a user of contrast paints and you like the way they work and they work for you. Pick up a couple that you've seen in this video that you like the look of, and try and compare them to the Citadel contrast versions and decide whether they're better for you. Well, thank you for watching. I hope you found the video useful in one sense or another, giving you a bit of an idea of whether to purchase and try out some of these videos if you haven't already done so. When I can get my hands on some of the Army Painter Speed Paint 2.0, I will do a little video like this as well. Again, there's been plenty of reviews for those that have early access on the market. I think they're hitting the market soon anyway, and I might not rush out and buy the whole set all at once just because it costs a lot of money, but I do like my existing Army Painter Speed Paints, and I will look to replace those with the new versions. And I'll be very interested to see how those colours that sort of suffered most from that reactivation, whether that's gone away as they have claimed. I'm pretty sure it has, which would be fantastic, as a couple of my favourite colours I have to be very careful how I use them just because of the way I paint. But this video isn't about army paint or speed paint, it's about Vallejo Xpress colour. And if you haven't gathered throughout the video from my comments, I like this range very much. It's a really good one coat paint, just like contrast paint was originally designed to be, but it's also sophisticated enough to thin well, use medium, go through the airbrush. You can make very, very nice looking miniatures from a base coat for one of these and then glazing in other colours, just as the example of the Dwarf Skin that I've been doing on recent tutorials. The finish is very, very good and definitely above that kind of beginner slap it on effect that many people think that these kind of paints are aimed at. But anyway, if you are new to the channel, please do go and check out the other videos. There may be something you like on there. There's plenty of stuff, historical right through to fantasy, loads of painting tutorials, reviews and vlogs, and lots of other stuff in between. So if you like what you see, please do consider subscribing. If you've liked the video, please do give us a like. It helps me out loads, helps get the video seen and lets me know I'm doing a good job. But all in all, thanks very much for watching. Take care and I will catch you soon.